in good governance and wisdom. And the focus of my study this morning, or my lesson this morning, will be by fearing the Lord, or in fear of the Lord. And what does that mean, and why is that important to us in our study? So, to start off with, I needed to understand, or I wanted to come across with what is good or bad governance. What do we understand by good or bad governance? What is governance? So, just to bring it back to a few things that we do or we understand is, to understand good governance, let's first look at what is bad governance. So that makes good governance a little easier to understand. So bad governance is associated with the following principles: corruption and greed, sounds very familiar; inequality, inequity, discrimination, partiality, unfairness, self-interest, self-gratification, self-centeredness, abuse and mistreatment of power, abuse and exploitation of resources, the lack of rule of law, no rule of law, cruelty, violence, failure to deliver outcomes, neglect, manipulation and misuse. So these are regular words that we use, but I want to use these words on our previous government, actually, on our apartheid government, that used their power and their influence to manipulate, to marginalize the minority, or majority actually, to make the minority bigger than is needed. They were partial in what they were doing. They exploited their resources. There was greed, all these things, and clearly it was a non-sustainable government that was doomed to destruction. God wasn't going to bless this government. God wasn't going to empower this government and let it rule for years and years because of the corruption and the greed and the bad governance that came out of it. So what is good governance? I don't know if we can say that there's any government that is good governance, but these are the principles of good governance that we aspire towards. So it's the process of acting in the best interest of others, for the benefit of the many rather than the few, and with due regard for the rule of law. So we put laws in place to govern how we ought to do things the right way. That it aligns us in not doing our own thing and taking advantage of others, but following what the rule of law says. Good governance is associated then with these following principles: anti-corruption and transparency, being able to see how we have done the work that we've done, that people can scrutinize what we have done and open up ourselves to criticism. Equality, the benefit for the many rather than the few, rather than looking at how this small margin of the elite will benefit, rather than, at the exploiting the few or the minority. To be impartial by not favoring one over the other. So we don't make, set others apart and, and marginalize others. We are impartial. We are fair across the board. We act in the best interest of others, rather than in self-gain, looking at how will I get out of this decision? What will I gain out of making this decision come forth? By putting this law out, how am I going to benefit? Rather than, instead we should be saying, how will the majority benefit from this? Rather than self-gain. Appropriate use of power and influence. That appropriate use of power and influence would be something like the government of Singapore, where their power and influence is they cannot, the current government in Singapore cannot take advantage of the previous government's winning. So if they've made a surplus in cash, then the current government cannot take advantage of that. They need to, in their current power and their current influence, make use of, uplifting the people even further and even greater. So they measure their government by the performance of the previous government. Otherwise, they'll be voted out. So appropriate power. Many, I would think the American government, exploits their power and their influence, by building nuclear weapons and aircraft carriers that really, for all of the rest of us who don't have that power, don't have really much to bring to the table to negotiate. It's their way or the highway, kind of, start to the conversation. Economic power. For the Americans, the previous administration at least, got rid of their environmental obligations because that was going to impact their economy rather than for the benefit of everybody else. How do we contribute to reducing our carbon, impact? So getting rid of or walking away from those environmental obligations. Appropriate use of resources and funds. So resources, labor can be a resource. How we mine out of the earth can be a resource. Even the air that we breathe is a resource. And we are exploiting the air that we breathe by polluting it, by dumping pollutants into the air, by how much money can I make out of this thing that I produce and have no regard for how I exploit this valuable resource in air that we have. Dumping into our seas, a valuable resource. Exploiting the fish out of the seas and just eating and consuming, without any control or without any gain. So appropriate use of those resources and funds. The rule of law and being subject to that same law. When many will say, I'm above the law, I'm above, what the law is. That's for everybody else but me. Or my status in society, sets me apart from that law being applicable. Speeding, I would think, it's applicable to everybody. But because I've got a fast car, I'm allowed to go faster than the law allows me, to, is not good governance. And success, to deliver outcomes, decisions and policy that doesn't get reversed. Again, reverting back to all the policies and laws and outcomes that the apartheid government tried to put in place. All of that being disassembled, taken apart, reversed, and new laws coming in place. And I'm sure in this current government, in time, when the new government comes in place, will also be taken apart, changed again, and reversed. So good governance is coming up with those policies that really do benefit and gain, that only that the next populace or the next administration will build on, will strengthen, will improve on. I know there's a lot of history about Obama. We think did a good job as a president, but even his policies that came in place had to be reversed and changed because it didn't quite work out the way it intended. So good governance. So let's look at government governance. Often governments and public institutions are measured by their good or bad governance in the following specific things. The fair collection of taxes. Do we take more from some and less from others? Accountable spending. So, all demonstrate how you've collected all those taxes and demonstrate how you've spent all of those taxes. With many governments, they don't want to know what they're spending it on. All the secret stuff that's happening in the background. In strengthening the secret police and the secret service so that it bolsters government's position rather than the man on the ground's position. Spending and impartiality. The provision of public goods to its citizens. Things like security of its citizens, health, upliftment of health and health care, that we have good healthcare facilities when we are in need of medical attention, education, teaching, knowledge transfer, rather than, I think of the Cambodian government in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I think it was. They had an aversion to knowledge. They burnt books, they closed schools, they put in prison their professors and their teachers as a government. So they suppressed knowledge because they felt that was a bad thing at the time, valuable resource. The protection of property, the protection of our environment, as I spoke about, the air, the ground, the sea, that we have, that our future generations can live in what we have today. The ability of change of rule through election and voting. So because I'm now in power, I'm in power forever. No. You're in power because you've empowered the people, and the people elected you into power, and they continue to elect you into power and vote for you. They can see the good things that you're doing. These are good governance, where if you're not doing good governance, eventually a generation will grow up and say, we want change, and vote you out. And change will come. And change is a scary thing for many, but change is a good thing also. Protection of the poor, minorities and the disadvantaged. How they looked after and cared for, or they just left behind and marginalized, for the better of those who are advancing, and the elite and all of those things. Being subject to checks and balances, as we mentioned before. Having an independent judiciary. I didn't really appreciate how important this is, but when governments can influence the judiciary to say, do as we say, or rule as we've instructed and commanded, then who can, keep government in check? But hence, the judiciary needs to be independent. The public protector needs to be independent. That government cannot influence the public protector, as we've seen what happens there. That there is social trust in government. That there is public regard, good regard, locally for the government, and international community has good regard for the government. Again, apartheid, we were sanctioned, we were set apart, we were separated, and there are many governments around the world that are also still today separated, banned, sanctioned internationally because of the policies, because of the human rights abuses, because of the not allowing good governance to prevail. So then, on the basis of that, what would biblical governance then be? So biblical governance leads to the following outcomes. Walking the straight and narrow, rather than the paths of destruction. This is good governance. Guarding the paths of righteousness and justice, so that we act justly, we act righteously, rather than how do we take advantage. To avoid the way of evil, of men, of perverted speech. So usually how evil comes about is us following men who have perverted speech, men who say things that will influence us into the ways of evil, lead us down the wrong way. And I'm sure for the apartheid government, there were sincere men who followed, thinking this was the right way, thinking, who were dedicated to the cause, with a belief that this is the right way. Unfortunately, eventually it would come to an end. But that's very likely how evil comes about, is us following perverted men's speech. Being exposed to the light, godly light, and not the darkness. Hiding in secret, doing things behind closed doors, doing things that our wife would not be pleased about, or our husband would not be pleased about, that the church would despise if they knew about it, those dark things. staying away from that darkness and being in the light where people can see the things that we are doing, exposed to the light. To avoid the crooked and the deceitful, doing things that is not right, things that is not that straight and narrow path. Biblical governance requires to act with integrity, to act avoiding corruption and wickedness. You'll find in the Old Testament many of the Israelite nation, or many times how the Israelite nation acted wickedly, acted with corruption, were influenced by the nations around them. This was God's people, God's chosen people, a priesthood. They were royal, they were pure, they were set apart for God's worship. And yet, because of the influence of the wickedness around them, how terribly influenced they were, and corrupted and fell apart and fell out of favor with God. Failing, having had His word, having had His people, having everything set up for them, to succeed. And had they continued to succeed in God's way, I'm sure they could have ruled the world to this day. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and God disciplined them as a result. To trust in the Lord and not to lean on your own understanding. This is biblical governance. This stands in contrast to how the world says we ought to be doing things. This is very much against the grain of the world saying, if you don't do this yourself, if you don't gain knowledge yourself and trust on your personal abilities, you're going to get nowhere. But biblical governance says, trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord, the world will say. We need to touch and feel and see and believe. Our science drives what's real and what's not real, what's possible and what we can do. Engineers, I love engineers, being an engineer myself. We're always pushing the boundaries of what was possible before and what we thought we could do. Rocketry, space exploration, trying to get a kilogram of weight of something useful into space. That is really, really hard. It costs a lot of money. It's really expensive. So engineers are pushing how cheaply we can do this successfully, launch after launch after launch, and make it cheaper and easier and safer, to do this regularly. And we benefit. Today we have satellite communication, satellite TV. We can see real-time weather reports. We know anywhere in the world that we're traveling on a small little device in our pockets. We have telescopes that are in space. I don't know if you're all following the remarkable science that's coming from the new James Webb telescope, which is 100 miles away from Earth at the moment, orbiting around it's orbiting all our planets. It's in geostationary orbit with what they call Lagrange 2. Anyway, amazing science that's coming from that telescope. So all of these things, man will trust in these things and trust in these science that he's finding. But the biblical governance is trust in the Lord. Avoid and do not lean on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. In all your ways, acknowledge God and trust in His precepts. Be not wise in your own eyes. So, as we grow in our years and we gain experience as adolescents and adults and into our senior years, we learn a lot of things. We've been through a lot of things. We become wise in our eyes. But the godly way is be not wise. Lean on Christ. Fear God and His righteousness. When we think, we can do it, it's trusting God and His righteousness. Honor the Lord with your wealth. Now that's definitely not something the world will teach you. But this is a biblical governance, a biblical requirement. Honor the Lord with your wealth and your first fruits. So it's not, I've gained whatever bit of money, let's spend what I need and all to my needs and sees, and whatever's left over, I give to God. First fruits means I first give to God, and what's left over, I learn to live from. That's a very, very difficult thing for many of us to do. And if we haven't started early on in our lives, it gets even more difficult later on in our lives to live that kind of lifestyle, to live that kind of desire. Imagine feeling bad having not paid God first, having robbed from God. I don't know if any of you have had that sensation. I've actually had that sensation, robbing from God. Feel bad about it. And need to do something about it, But that's an attitude change in one's life to honor God with your wealth, because He blesses me. He blesses me so much, and He'll bless you so much. Brother Errol speaks, so fondly of the many blessings that God has seen through, and the things where you can't imagine, how you're going to get through that, but God has seen him through these things. Let's honor the Lord. Do not despise the Lord's discipline. We don't like that. We don't like being disciplined. We despise it. We rebuke it. We are weary of His reproof, His rebuke, His criticism, His scolding of our action. We don't like that. Lord, don't tell me off how to do my things. We must love the Lord's discipline, grow in the Lord's discipline. This is biblical governance. So in knowing these things, we need to find the knowledge of God. And to find the knowledge of God is to understand the fear of the Lord. That's our starting point. No chance I'm going to be able to offload all the knowledge of God. We can find all of it in there, but that's not the point. The point is we need to start somewhere. And the first step in gaining this biblical governance, being in the right path with God, is to recognize that we need to have a fear of the Lord. From our scripture reading, which we read earlier today, Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." However, we want to gain knowledge. And the starting point for us is the fear of the Lord. So what is the benefit to fear God and His knowledge? What will we gain from His wisdom? Because we are a people who desire things. We want things. It needs to, we need to get something out of this always. We can never, because it's the right thing to do. Wisdom, from worldly wisdom. And there's a lot of wisdom in the world. There's a lot of good things in the world that have been found. But how do we recognize true wisdom? What is the right wisdom that we should focus on? And what blessings are there in His wisdom? Well, I want you to please turn with me to Proverbs chapter 3. And I want to just read through, out of time here, I must skip, I'm actually going to skip all of this. I'm going to wanted to read this. But here are the blessings in wisdom. And the book of Proverbs, just an amazing book, amazing wealth of knowledge to teach us what is required to do. But just as an opening remark, verse 13 says, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her," this is the wisdom, "is better than gain from silver, and her profit is better than gold. She is more precious than jewels." Just a side note, look at that. An amazing correlation of wisdom, using the analogy of a woman and wisdom. To cherish women and the knowledge and the wisdom that they have. Just really fantastic of our ladies, that Solomon would, associate that, and just a big thank you to our ladies for that. She's more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire, nothing you can imagine and desire can compare with her, with wisdom. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. This is the benefit of having this wisdom in your right hand. First go after the wisdom, and in this left hand you will have wealth and honor. Her ways, wisdom, are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life, and we know what a tree looks like, and its roots and its strength. To those who lay hold of her, those who hold her fast are called blessed. You will be called blessed if you go after this wisdom and not man's wisdom. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth, by understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open, the clouds dropped down the dew. My son, do not lose sight of these. Keep sound wisdom and discretion. They will be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. Beauty around your neck. Then you will walk in your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. The inverse of that is walk away from wisdom and you will stumble. You will struggle. We will struggle. If you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. You will sleep soundly. Not worried about who's going to come knocking on my door, coming after me because of what I've done. Do not be afraid of sudden terror or of the ruin of the wicked when it comes. For the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due. If you can do good, don't withhold it from them when it is in your power to do it. And there are many things that is in our power to do. We can't change what government does, but we can certainly change where we are in our influential world, our colleagues, our neighbors, what we do, where we walk. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come again tomorrow or the next day. I will give it. I'll only help you next day. Or, when it suits me, I will help you. When in actual fact, you have it with you. Let's help our neighbors. Let's help those in our church, in our community. Let's be benevolent when we have it to help. Amazing words of wisdom this. Do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. Do not contend with a man for no reason when he has done you no harm. Do not envy a man of violence. Do not choose any of his ways. For the devious person is an abomination to the Lord, but the upright are in his confidence. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the dwelling of the righteous. Toward the scorners he is scornful, but to the humble he gives favor. The wise will inherit honor, but fools get disgrace. Just skipping through that. So I've got a few further proverbs here of the fear of the Lord being the beginning of knowledge. You will understand the fear of the Lord and find knowledge of God. Proverbs 2 verse 5. Proverbs 8 verse 13. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance and the way of evil of perverted speech I hate. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the Holy One is might, is insight. The fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be short. In the fear of the Lord one has strong confidence, and his children will have refuge. Fear of the Lord, the fountain of life, that may turn away from the snares of death. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasures and trouble with it. The fear of the Lord is instruction in wisdom. Humility comes before honor. By steadfast love and faithfulness, iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord one turns away from evil. Just skipping through, let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. To conclude, we need to strive in good governance, and not just the worldly governance as I had shown out, but worldly governance leads us to understand better what biblical governance is. Let us strive in that biblical governance to achieve the principles of good governance. good governance being anti-corruptive, impartial, the rule of law, equality, and the appropriate use of our power and influence. One needs to find the knowledge in God's wisdom, and there's much knowledge there to learn and find out that will guide us. The beginning of such knowledge is the fear of the Lord. And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and wisdom not derived from man or worldly pursuits and desires. Wisdom that leads to life and blessings and true rewards. Wisdom that nurtures growth and sustainable development. This is what we want. We want to sustainably grow, not be torn down and broken apart, but what we do and the things that we act, that the Lord continues to bless us, continues to further our territory. Wisdom that grows incorruptible wealth. So that's not wealth that we accumulate here on the earth. It's not the wealth that by the car that I drive, by the watch that I wear, by the clothes that I wear, but rather a wealth that is stored up for us in heaven, worth more than gold or silver. Let us go after that wealth and build up for that wealth. Wealth that cannot decay or be stolen. Wisdom that surpasses expectations. Do you have an expectation to achieve something? Things that are beyond your imagination, beyond your possibility. Lord, this couldn't be possible in my life. Well, wisdom, if we gain wisdom, we can meet those expectations, exceed those expectations. We will achieve those things we couldn't imagine possible before. Let's go after that kind of wisdom in order to obtain these things. Wisdom that rescues the oppressed and saves the lost. Brethren, there are many that are lost, many that are oppressed. And it's through God's wisdom that they are rescued. Not by any means that we have done, but by what God has done and achieved. Wisdom found in no other than God and Christ Jesus. This is the wisdom that we need to go after. This is the wisdom that is going to grow our maturity. Wisdom is found only through the fear of the Lord, the belief of the Lord, faithfulness in the Lord, trusting in the Lord, putting what we do, our lives, our purpose in the Lord. And finally, to mature in God's wisdom and knowledge, and all these things shall be added unto you. So when we are maturing in our wisdom and our knowledge, all these things we desire, all these blessings that we want, they will be added unto you. Brethren, I want to thank you for your time. If there's anybody who is in need of prayer, let it be known as we stand now and sing the song of invitation. Bring back to me the light,
In ocean sea, my faith will stand.